suppose as exciting as watching paint dry this morning, but...
Canada's revolving door. The constitutional talk that never seems to end.
We're all fed up with this constitution. Like, let's move on.
A lot of Canadians are suffering from constitutional fatigue.
I don't know of anybody that I know that is not dead tired.
At its most trivial, there's boredom at an agonizingly slow and complex debate.
Very difficult.
At its most serious, anger that national problems like the recession and the personal tragedies they bring with them are being ignored.
Why should $125 million be spent on an issue of unity when the very issue of feeding each other isn't even being dealt with today?
When Canada was involved in changing the Constitution Act that was present and in operation here, they were going to change it from it only reflecting a corporate nature into it reflecting human rights and fundamental freedoms. Now, at the time, they were having extreme difficulty hashing out all the articles of law that were supposed to be. In Quebec, there was opposition to this Constitution Act. The way the media was playing it with the public, people were getting fed up. They were getting upset, they were bored, they were frustrated, they were tired about hearing about the Constitution Act, when this was one of the most important situations that had taken place in Canada in recent years, because this Constitution Act was going to bring forth human rights and fundamental freedoms for the individual. Prior to this Charter of Rights and Freedoms being erected, we did not have that availability. We did not have those expressions of law present in Canada. But through this charter that would be enacted, those operations of law would be available for human beings. And it's sad to see how the media was playing it off, making Canadians get upset, get tired, get disillusioned over this fact.
The issue among the politicians is whether all these talks yet to come would absorb and distract Canada the way the talks just passed have done.
Far from bringing the current round of constitutional wrangling to an end, a yes vote will deepen and broaden and perpetuate it.
Approval of this agreement can put the Constitution on the back burner, out of the headlines, where it belongs.
There you see one of the politicians saying and declaring that the Constitution of Canada belongs on the back burner, out of the public eye. That is a real weird statement to make, for the Constitution of Canada is the supreme law of Canada, and it is what governs Canada. And therein we find the expression of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Therefore, it is of the utmost importance. This document is the most important document here in Canada. But yet, these politicians, they want to just stick it in the closet, if you will to say. Put it in the drawer and close it. Why? Because those rights and freedoms that were going to be enumerated in the Constitution Act of 1982 were going to bring about human rights and fundamental freedoms. And I'm sure that a lot of the politicians weren't very happy.
Charlottetown PEI, the Fathers of Confederation began talking about what they hoped would be a more peaceful union of peoples and provinces. They came up with the British North America Act, Canada's original constitution. Not much more than an organizational chart, really, dividing up powers between Ottawa and the provinces. But it worked well enough for 100 years or so, and Canadians were able to get on with other things.
That the people of Quebec have had enough of the present system.
And then something dramatically changed. Seeking to become masters in their own house, many Quebecers demanded stronger powers for the province. And the talk began.
And the people of Canada decide if they want to join.
A decade and a half later, all the governments except Quebec agreed on the 1982 Constitution Act. It was a profound change. By listing individual rights from free speech to women's equality, it transformed the Constitution from an organizational chart for governments into a citizen's charter.
This charter was very important, for it removed Canada from being only under a corporate charter concerning their Constitution Act, the one from 1867. And this charter, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, placed the legal obligation upon Canada to fulfill its international obligations, to erect a Constitution Act that allowed for the expression of fundamental human rights and freedoms. Now, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a constitution that is available to the individual for their human rights and fundamental freedoms. And no longer is it only of a corporate nature or a corporate structure. The operations of law that were expressed in this charter gave us individuals the ability to operate under and to have our natural rights recognized. And this charter helps us to walk away, to remove ourselves from the commercial corporation that has been set up in the name and on behalf
Quebec cannot go it alone, but given the right circumstances, it can indeed go. That is the unanimous opinion today of the Supreme Court of Canada. It was asked whether Quebec has the right under Canadian or international law to separate unilaterally from the rest of Canada.
Within the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, there are many recognized rights for the human being, such as the right to association, the right to own property alone, and the right to enter into recognition as a juridical personality. A lot of these natural rights that have been expressed, they allow us, as I have said, to remove ourselves from the commercial system, from being unified with that corporation called Canada. Quebec was trying to use those individual rights that were expressed in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for the individual human being. They were trying to use it for their province on a provincial level to try and separate from the rest of Canada. And that operation of law is not available for a province because a province is a legal person. Although it is an individual, it is not a human individual. Those rights and freedoms that allow us, that operation of law, to separate from that de facto corporation is only available to human beings.
The Supreme Court justices state that any attempt to effect the secession of a province from Canada must be undertaken pursuant to the Constitution of Canada or else violate the Canadian legal order. So that means no unilateral moves. But faced with a majority of Quebecers supporting sovereignty, what then? The justices say the rest of the country would have to negotiate. The clear repudiation by the people of Quebec of the existing constitutional order would confer legitimacy on demands for secession and place an obligation on other provinces and the federal government to acknowledge and respect that expression of democratic will by entering into negotiations. The clear repudiation by the people of Quebec of the existing constitutional order would confer legitimacy on demands for secession and place an obligation on other provinces and the federal government to acknowledge and respect that expression of democratic will by entering into negotiations.
The Supreme Court of Canada stated that unless the people decide to separate themselves, to not want to be part of the corporation, the de facto corporation Canada, then Quebec cannot do it on their own. They referred to the Constitution Act of Canada, 1982, saying that any actions must come out of the Charter and must be followed by the operation of law that is available in the Charter. And the Supreme Court stated that if an individual or someone does indeed declare that they do not want to be part of the de facto corporation Canada, such as a human being expressing their fundamental rights and freedoms, that Canada had the obligation to respect that democratic decision and to honor that democratic decision by negotiations with that party. So you, as a human being, when you say, I refuse to take recognition as that legal person, as the subject or servant, the Canadian citizen, and I stand with all my fundamental rights and freedoms, Canada has the obligation to respect you. And those rights and freedoms, those things that you are entitled to, your natural rights, Canada must fulfill on your behalf. Those rights and freedoms, they come out, they are expressed through international law, and you can find them by watching these videos here at YouTube.